Welcome, scholars, to another thrilling episode of this TV show called U.S. History. I hope you're doing okay at home. Today we're going to continue talking about the civil rights movements throughout history. And today we're going to be focusing on women's rights movement and the Equal Rights Amendment. Maybe you've got your notes out. I have mine here on my phone. It's what I was messing with before. Maybe you've got them printed. Remember, with the Google Doc, you just go to the top left, file, save a copy, or it's like make a copy or whatever, and then like that's the one that you get to use. You don't have to email me for permission to access or whatever. So we're going to be looking at a document together today, taking some notes. We're going to look at a video, and then you're going to get to put all of that together to answer the next part of the lesson. So let's go ahead. Let's begin talking about women's rights movement. And we really have to start by talking about the women's suffrage movement. So we talked about this first semester, like a while ago. And so the women's suffrage movement was originally inspired by abolitionist movements, right? So abolitionism, we remember, is the movement to end slavery. And so the abolitionist movements kind of make women more aware of their own lack of power, make them aware of the inequality in society between men and women. It's at the Seneca Falls Convention in 1848, named for Seneca Falls, where an assembly of women gathered together, led by Elizabeth Stanton. And there we see kind of the first public statement of changes proposed by women, of the problems in society. And the Seneca Falls Convention is eventually going to kind of build into the women's suffrage movement. Alice Paul is another leader there. We're going to talk about Alice Paul later in the lesson again. And the women's suffrage movement is kind of like that first kind of public government baseline of women's rights, leading into the 19th Amendment. The right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex. So there we're ensuring, supposedly, the right of women to vote, right? Where does that go next? So this really kind of leads into the idea of feminism. Feminism originally comes from a French word. The word feminism and feminist won't actually appear in the United States popular culture until the early 1900s. The goal of feminism is really pretty simple. It's to create social equality of the sexes between men and women, right? The political equality, economic equality, personal equality, right? Those are three different areas, right? Political equality, the voice, voting, participation, holding offices. Economic equality, we're immediately probably thinking of equal pay. Personal equality, personal control. So when we're seeing the word feminism, it's about equality between the sexes. Equality, you see here, equality, feminism, essentially one and the same here. That's what we're talking about. So this idea kind of builds into what we call the second wave of women's rights. So the first wave would have been suffrage, right? Women's right to vote. The second wave then is now kind of political, personal, economic equality, right? Like all three areas all at once. And so this is happening around the 1950s, 1960s. What inspired this movement, really similar to women's suffrage, is the civil rights movements that are happening at this time over race relations, as well as the Vietnam War. So we see these two areas influencing the women's rights movement and bringing to light the inequalities, the disparities between men and women. The majority of the leaders and supporters of this women's rights movement in the 50s, 60s, 70s, it's primarily middle-class, upper-class women, married women who find those traditional roles of strictly being a housewife, strictly being a mother, finding those roles unfulfilling. And there also were some like legitimate legal arguments here, legal complaints that women would have. For example, at this time, in many states, women could not enter into contracts on their own. They were considered like a legal entity with their husband. So it was really like the husband was making most of the decisions. So women couldn't enter into contracts on their own. They couldn't own land on their own. They couldn't write a will on their own, or even be on a jury. Women couldn't be on a jury. And the logic there was that women were too emotional, that they couldn't be objective on a jury. Ridiculous. And then also that if they were on a jury, if they had to go to court, then that's going to interfere with their household duties. You can't have that, right? If women aren't home, who will take care of the house? I don't know. I guess it's just the house just is a disaster then, right? So some legitimate arguments here, right? So a lot of the married women, a lot of the women in general, really begin to build momentum out of the ideas published by Betty Friedan in her book, The Feminine Mystique. You can see the book right here on this table. And then, of course, this is Betty Friedan, right? Not just like a random picture. But Betty Friedan is this author who writes this book that ends up being a bestseller. And the main point of the book is that after World War II, women kind of became homemakers, right? The baby boom happened. Families start moving out into the suburbs, expanding, growing. And Betty Friedan is arguing here that women are as capable as men for any type of work, any career path. That they don't just have to stay at home. They don't have to simply be a wife, simply be a mom. That against the arguments made by television and schools and psychologists, that women are just as capable as men for any other type of work. And that women who are, forced to stay at home as a wife or a homemaker, that they are suffering this disease that has no name, right? This kind of like unfulfillment, this lack of satisfaction with themselves, with their lives. And for Betty Friedan and for the women's movement in the 60s and 70s and so on, women's rights is the basic human need to grow, man's will to be all that is in him or her to be, right? It's reaching your full potential. So Betty Friedan is saying here that women really lack the opportunity to reach their full potential in society, right? Unless we make some significant political, social, economic changes, that women are missing out on reaching their full potential. And so we have an excerpt here. We have the primary source, of course, here. It's an excerpt from The Feminine Mystique by Betty Friedan. Go ahead and pause the video. We'll talk about what this means, but pause the video and we'll talk through it. But give it a read yourself. I'll let you pause it. Okay. You've unpaused the video. I've drank that coffee. Let's see what's happening. So, in this first paragraph, the problem was a strange stirring, a sense of dissatisfaction, a yearning that women suffered in the middle of the 20th century in the United States. Each suburban wife struggled with it alone, right? So there she's kind of setting the scene that historically suburban women are kind of struggling with this problem. But what is this problem? Well, she's making the beds, she's shopping, she's matching the bed covers, the slip covers, making sandwiches for her children. She goes to sleep at night, and then she's afraid to ask this question, is this all? And this is really significant because the question that women are facing is like, I'm unsatisfied with simply taking care of a family, with simply taking care of a house. And yet, if she were to voice this complaint, this thought, right? It says she was afraid. If she was to voice that, now she's worried of being seen as a bad wife or a bad mom or being like ungrateful for her family, right? And that's not the thing at all, right? That's not her complaint. The complaint is that in the 15 years after World War II, this mystique of feminine fulfillment became the cherished core of contemporary American culture, that women could be fulfilled completely simply by being at home, simply by living up to that perfect example, and I'm pointing here with the arrow, suburban, of simply just being a housewife, kissing their husbands goodbye, sending their kids to school. And so here, their only dream was to be perfect wives and mothers their highest ambition to have 5 children and a beautiful house, their only fight to get and keep their husbands. They had no thought for the unfeminine problems of the world outside the home. They wanted the men to make the major decisions. So here she's describing the problem. She's describing the thing that the women's movement has the solutions for, right? That's what we have there in The Feminine Mystique in this section here. It's a bestseller. I highly recommend. I can't show you the whole book, but it's out there. It's online. You know how to use the internet. So we'll just keep going. We also see, along with Betty Friedan and kind of the political, economic, personal movements, we also see the sexual revolution of the 1960s kind of forming into, conglomerating into the women's movement. You'll remember from your chapter readings, I know that seems like decades ago, but you'll remember the name Margaret Sanger. So she devoted her life to legalizing birth control, making it available for women. And where the paths begin to cross is Betty Friedan publishes this book. And a little bit before that, in 1960, the first birth control pill is approved by the FDA. Well, in the early 1960s, basically 1960 to 1963, 4-ish, the majority of states made it a criminal offense to sell them, right? And so there we immediately see a roadblock there to women's liberation, to women's freedom. And so that goes all the way to the Supreme Court, where it's declared in 1965, birth control is a right for married couples, right? That's going to get expanded later on in the courts. But birth control kind of is a bigger issue for the women's rights movement. It becomes a matter of education, of awareness, of activism, of a woman's right to control her future, to control her family, to control herself, right? And so Griswold v. Connecticut, that Supreme Court case, it's a bigger issue than just the birth control. It's about a woman's freedom, a woman's right. And so that becomes a bigger part of the women's rights movement as well. We're also going to see Griswold v. Connecticut, by the way, that reasoning there, that birth control is basically an issue of privacy. That's going to jump into Roe v. Wade. Maybe you've heard of that. But that's going to also launch the arguments around the Equal Rights Amendment. We're going to talk about that very soon. So we've got the women's rights movement. It's going along, right? Full steam ahead. Betty Friedan publishes this book. Margaret Sanger, Liberating Women. What's going to happen? The National Organization for Women, right? So we have this new organization. I don't know where to move my little guy. I'll just move him here so now it looks like my head is on his body. But in 1966, so Betty Friedan publishes her book, Birth Control is Legalized. The National Organization for Women, they form now, and they form to gain equality for women. So what are their issues here? What are they trying to fight for specifically? Well, they want to eliminate discrimination and harassment, basically everywhere. In the workplace, women are facing harassment. Schools, women are facing reduced opportunities education-wise. In the justice system, women are being discriminated against. They want to secure reproductive rights, right? Reproductive rights, they're talking about birth control there. They want to secure and protect a woman's right to have access to that. They want to end all forms of violence against women. They're talking about domestic violence issues, right? They want stronger protections, stronger punishments for those who commit violence against women. And then in a bigger sense, they also want to eradicate racism, sexism, homophobia. They want to promote equality and justice in society. So the National Organization for Women, it's really fighting, yes, it's for women, but it's to raise women up to the equal rights that men already had access to. Predominantly white men already had access to, right? So it's about lifting not just women, but lifting everyone who is disadvantaged up, right? So up to this point, you might be wondering, what else is there to complain about? Before, maybe there was something, but now, don't we hasn't the government done some things? Yes. For one, John F. Kennedy, he explored this issue of women and inequality. We see the Equal Pay Act of 1963 coming about, where it's the first federal law prohibiting sexual discrimination as far as paying men and women different amounts. In 1963, by the way, it was like women were earning 50% of what men were earning. That gap has been closed much more since then. There's still some work to be done. We also have the Civil Rights Act of 1964. We talked about that. Under Lyndon B. Johnson, that bans discrimination, but here's why the National Organization for Women, I'm moving my mouse around the little thing, these things were poorly and unevenly enforced. And they wanted stronger protections, right? They wanted something in the Constitution that could not be taken away, that could not be changed, right? These are just laws, right? And the government is free to follow them, to change them, to ignore them. I want you to think about the South, and the Civil Rights Act was there, and yet did African Americans suddenly just have full equality? No, the South just ignored it. Right? And so women are looking for something stronger, more concrete, something constitutional, so that women's rights, women's protection isn't just up to politicians and how they decide to interpret things. So that leads us to the Equal Rights Amendment. So the Equal Rights Amendment, it's originally written in 1923, right, a long time ago, by Alice Paul. What? She made another appearance. Alice Paul. So after women's suffrage, after women gained the right to vote, Alice Paul then was like, you know what the next thing is? Boom, equal rights under the law. But at the time, people were like, no, it's too soon, right? Like, they were still struggling to fight for African American women's right to vote. They were still facing a huge amount of scrutiny, of discrimination. So since 1923, year after year, the Equal Rights Amendment was brought up in Congress, ignored, brought up in Congress, ignored, like over and over. It's like since 1923, this is a thing that they have been trying to get passed. What is the Equal Rights Amendment, by the way? Very simple. We have it right here. Equality of rights under the law shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex, right? So we see there, men and women essentially must be guaranteed equal rights, and sex cannot be used as a basis for discriminating against either group, right? So finally, 1971, Representative Martha Griffiths, with the help of NOW, that organization we just talked about. Can I go back? Oh, tight. We just went backwards in time. NOW, right? Their whole thing was like lobbying and trying to get politicians to pass the Equal Rights Amendment. Well, it works in 1971. It's approved in 1972. And then all that's left, because we know that changing the Constitution is just so easy. It's not. It has to just be ratified or approved by 38 of the 50 states. Should be easy, right? If we can just get states to approve this, it'll become part of the Constitution. Well, this bill actually had a ton of support. In the first year that they opened it up for the states to approve, because they only gave the states 7 years to get 38, right? They put a time limit on there. 30 of the states approved it. Right? So like right off the bat, they're super close. And this faces a lot of support from all sides. President Nixon, he supported the Equal Rights Amendment. The two presidents after him supported the Equal Rights Amendment. Future Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, she wrote and spoke in support of the Equal Rights Amendment, saying here that it would look toward a legal system in which each person will be judged on the basis of individual merit and not on the basis of an unalterable trait of birth that bears no necessary relationship to need or ability. So this faces a lot of support. I keep saying faces support, and that makes it sound negative. It has a lot of support. People are behind it. There we go. By the way, the secret word that you'll enter into Google Forms is this word down here, equal. I don't know. Seems like a fitting word. So enter that word in, equal, all caps, lowercase, up to you. Let's go to the next slide. Now, you might think, okay, who would be against this very simple equality of rights? Don't deny it. Like, yeah, seems pretty straightforward. Well, we have the Stop ERA. This is the name of the group, Stop ERA, and it's headed up by a woman named Phyllis Schlafly. She is a conservative activist from Illinois, and she formed this group to stop the passage of the Equal Rights Amendment. So at this point, the Equal Rights Amendment has gotten approval from 30 of the 38 states that they need. That means just 8 states. Can I fit my hands in the bubble? Yeah. Just 8 states need to approve it. Now, in Schlafly's eyes, the Equal Rights Amendment was terrible for women. She felt it was terrible for women. For example, Schlafly was arguing that women would be forced to fight in the military, right? So she's saying, like, look, if men and women are going to be equal, think about it. Women will now be treated as equal, and that's bad for women because they would, 1, be forced to fight in the military, 2, that it would destroy financial support laws, so that is like alimony or child support. She was saying that, like, look, if the ERA passes, say goodbye to alimony, say goodbye to child support. At this time, there were also limits on the number of hours that women could work in some places. It also, women were often faced some discrimination, especially for dangerous jobs like construction, like working like in cutting down trees. What's the word? Lumberjack, that's the word. So like she was saying, like, look, women are basically going to be forced to work into dangerous jobs. The ERA is bad for women. She even said that men and women would have to share public toilets and locker rooms. That last part, not true, by the way. We have constitutional amendments against that. But she went out there and she really scared people about the ERA. And she specifically focused on those 8 states that were remaining, because she knew that she didn't have to stop the other 30. She just needed to convince these other 8 states from approving it, and she just needed them to hold out long enough from approving it. And so one little fun story about her is that when she would go and speak at these rallies, she would purposely try to just like mess with the other side, like mess with the women's liberation people, and she would start all of her speeches with, "I'd like to thank my husband for letting me attend this rally." You know, so she was just like trolling to the highest degree. So let's take a look at Betty Friedan and Phyllis Schlafly. They actually went on a talk show and they each kind of like said their sides. So I want you to get a sense of not only what they're saying, like how they summarize each of their sides. Remember, this is going to the American people, like that's the audience here. But I also want you to kind of notice, like, what are they like as people? You've heard me talk about them here, but like, think for yourself, like, how do I perceive these people and what would I think of them if I saw them on TV? So let's take a look. You can either watch it here or I'll give you the link in my class page if you want to watch it in a different tab, but let's take a look.
So is the Equal Rights Amendment too vague, or does the Equal Rights Amendment simply extend women's rights to men, thus equalizing them? What is your opinion? Betty, can we hear from you?
Well, you see, I think we simply must, and I think we should do it rightfully in 1976, 200th year of the Republic, get the Constitution equally applied to women. I mean, we know now, we've spent 10 years really delineating all the areas where sex discrimination exists. Discrimination basically against women, but some ways that men are victims of it too. And we've got a lot of laws that have we've made some gains to say that it is wrong to have sex discrimination in employment, in education, in pay, in mortgage, in credit, in all these things, even in sports against women. But these laws are not being enforced. And with the economic crisis that we're in now, where, you know, really inflation is giving and layoffs are really facing women with hard times, there's danger even that some of the programs and laws against sex discrimination will be removed. And we need the constitutional guarantee of equality. And we also need it because there are a great many people, especially housewives, who really are discriminated against, whose all the work they have done in the home to help build up whatever income the total family has and so on and so forth. There is no law that now exists that makes those women who have been working as housewives insured in their own right for old age, for Social Security. There's no insurance that if that marriage should end in divorce, as it is for all too many people, that woman's contribution will be considered equally in the disposition of the property. And there is no provision even really, as it is now, to enforce child support, much less alimony for women. We really absolutely need the Equal Rights Amendment to enable all the young women and men that are coming out of law school now to create new bodies of law that will really protect women.
So let's just kind of sum up what she just said there. So she started off the first half of her argument saying, like, yes, society has made some advances when it comes to civil rights. Let's not downplay that. However, those things can always be removed. And so if you do something as permanent as make a constitutional amendment, then you can kind of guarantee that women will always kind of have economic security, child support. She mentioned specifically, like that's an issue that's going to be a lot really important to women at home watching this. That if you do something permanent, that you're going to create kind of permanent security and equality for women, right? So that's her stance here. Let's see what Phyllis Schlafly has to say.
When you make the laws apply equally to men and women, you end up taking away many of the rights that women now have. For example, the Equal Rights Amendment will make our young women subject to the draft and military combat the next time we have one of these wars that we have every 10 years. Because no longer could you have it just apply to males, it would have to apply equally to females. And then ERA is a big attack on the rights of the homemaker. The laws of every state make it the obligation of the husband to support his wife, to provide her with a home, to support their minor children. The woman in the home can draw Social Security benefits based on her husband's earnings, even though she's been a homemaker all her life. Now, all these things will be lost when you apply a rule that says that everything must be equal. Now, until you can make it equal for men to have the babies just like women, then it is a double burden to the women to say that the rules for family support should be equal on the husband and the wife. ERA ends up in taking away the right of the wife to be supported by her husband and to have the right of to get credit in the stores based on her husband's earnings and all the rights of a wife.
Can we talk about the draft? We know that the draft...
So we'll pause right there. What is Phyllis Schlafly saying, right? So she's saying that if you enforce equality between men and women, that you are basically removing security from women, right? She's talking about the protections that women get from society because they're seen as needing protection from society, right? So for Phyllis Schlafly, she's saying it's okay if women are potentially seen as like needing more assistance or more help or protection, because with the Equal Rights Amendment, that's going to open them up to more danger, more risk. It's going to expose them to more hardship, and that's why Phyllis Schlafly here, that's her stance. She's saying that, like, that's why the ERA is not good for women, that it's actually counterintuitively bad, right? So let's keep going. Oh, nice, it just worked like that. Current status of the ERA. So Congress originally set a ratification or an approval deadline of 1979. That is, they had to get 38 states by 1979. They extended it as well, another like 3 years. And so the amendment ends up only receiving 35 of the necessary 38 ratifications. You can see here the states that ratified it. Indiana, by the way, we did ratify this. And Schlafly is a big reason why it failed. She started her campaign in 1972. The amendment was widely popular. 30 states ratified it in the first year. With only 8 states to go, it fails. The most recent state to approve was Virginia, actually, in January 2020, right? Which raises the question, well, isn't there this deadline? Like, hasn't the deadline been reached? That's what people are still unsure about. Some say that deadlines shouldn't matter. If you get 38 states to do it, then you've got 38 states and it's an amendment. The Department of Justice in January made an argument that no, There's a deadline. Also, 3 of the states, because of Phyllis Schlafly, they actually revoked their ratifications. They revoked their approvals. And so we still don't actually know. And this is still like very much a current event. Here are some like 3 stories that I was able to pull really quickly where we see that this is still an issue that is very much on the table. Are they going to continue with the current Equal Rights Amendment? I don't know. Are they going to start over and try to like do it, without any of these legal hurdles of it expired, it's past the deadline? Who knows? This is probably going to continue to be an issue in our lifetimes. Like, this is going to be one of probably the big things in your lifetime, at the very least. So that's the current status of the ERA, is that it's kind of on the table, but it's not an amendment. It did not pass. It did not happen. So nice work on the lecture, I assume. I assume you took really good notes. If you have any questions, email me or just like rewind it and watch it again. So on to the next thing in the agenda. By the way, if this seems really interesting to you, if you're interested in like this back and forth and the arguments over this amendment, there's coincidentally a brand new TV show that I know is streaming on Hulu, maybe elsewhere too, but it's called Mrs. America, and it's specifically about the fight over the Equal Rights Amendment. This is Phyllis Schlafly in the TV show. I haven't checked it out yet, but I've heard really good things. I don't know the rating, so like ask your parent or guardian. I don't know how that works. But if you're interested, there is definitely way more stuff out there to read, to watch, to dig into. Okay, that's all for now. Have a good day. Bye.